Blue and red lights rolled slow past the oaks and stopped in front of my porch, and for a second I thought I was still half asleep then. Darla Kane from the Harbor Oaks HOA stepped between two officers, like she owned the sidewalk, waving a folder stamped "Violations," and telling them I was hiding an illegal dog. I stood there in flannel pants and socks, coffee cooling in my hand, and said the only honest thing I could say: I don't even own a fish. The tall cop asked if I'd consent to a search. I said, "Knock yourselves out," and Darla smirked like Christmas came early. They swept the yard. The deck, the shed beams of light cutting through mist. And that's when it hit. A sharp bark, loud, echoing a little metallic enough to make everyone freeze. Darla whispered, "Die like a villain in a movie." But 20 minutes later, there was still no animal. Just wind in the oaks, and her lawyer clutching a briefcase, as if it were a life raft. The next morning, a fluorescent ticket was taped to my door. "Unauthorized animal, $250, and my daughter Lily asked if we had to move. I moved us to Harbor Oaks for calm after my wife Jenna died for lawns and Little League, and neighbors who waved, not this, not a president, who measured grass with a ruler and treated the bylaws like scripture." I called the office. The secretary sounded tired. Said Darla had submitted audio recordings, and if I wanted to contest the fine, the board met Thursday, and I hung up with that heat in my face. You get when you're accused of something that doesn't exist. You know what I mean. By Thursday, the community center felt like a courtroom folding chairs and whispers. Ed, the HOA president, rubbing his temples, Darla in a blazer that creaked when she moved, and when she stood up, she made it sound like I'd unleashed a hellhound on this block. She hit play on a tiny speaker, and a bark filled the room, hollow and weird, and everyone leaned forward like I was about to pull a rabbit out of a hat, except the same bark drifted in again from the open windows, and the entire crowd poured outside. On the power line over the lot, a glossy crow sat like a little street comedian, with a beak turned its head, and barked again. Not a caw, a bark, perfect as a ringtone. People laughed. One neighbor said corvids mimic sounds, phones, alarms, even voices. And I just stood there, feeling a mix of relief and anger and something like shame for having to prove a negative to a room that wanted drama more than truth. Darla didn't back down. New notice the next morning. Wildlife disturbance, $300. And that was the moment I decided I wasn't paying a dime for a bird on a wire. I set a camera on my porch at sunrise 3 days straight. Captured the crow perched above my house, barking at the sky, then hopping over to Darla's mailbox to do an encore like it had a schedule to keep. The following week, I plugged my phone into the projector at the meeting the HD footage ran. A few people snorted, and before anyone could vote, a city guy named Daniel Pierce walked in with a clipboard and said he'd reviewed 6 dog complaints all filed by one person, and then he slid a photo onto the table. The same crow mid-bark on a stop sign 2 houses down. It should have ended there, but if you know a certain type of authority, you know it never ends there. Animal control rolled into Harbor Oaks that weekend with traps, decoys, a speaker that played crow distress calls under the live oaks, and half the neighborhood pulled out lawn chairs like it was movie night.
I called an attorney named Ava Morales, who has a backbone like keel steel. We walked the wreck with a tape and a notepad, and she said, "Trespass, vandalism, interference with quiet enjoyment. We'll file and we'll win." And the association countered with a lawsuit, padded with words like visual harmony and reputational damages like their newsletter was scripture. So we put on clean jackets and went to court, where Eva laid out deed aerials, the county zoning officer who swore under oath my parcel sat outside Hickory Bluff's jurisdiction. Then she pulled one clean card, I owned 51% of White Oak Landing LLC, a modest legal marina with 14 slips, and 7 of those slips were leased by Hickory Bluffs members. The judge glanced at the list, glanced at Linda, and dismissed their case like a fly. No jurisdiction, no demolition. Any further interference will be treated as criminal, he said.
The brigade came back with props, a Bluetooth speaker, a phone with a ridiculous jingle, a garage remote that kept opening and closing a door down the block, turning Darla's porch into a noisy yard sale, the sounds bouncing off windows while neighbors tried not to laugh too loud. The next day, animal control returned with a falconer and a hawk named Aries. And I'll admit, when that bird launched into the pink morning, it looked like the end of the nonsense. Even Darla clapped, said finally, "Teach them a lesson." But the crows didn't scatter. They rose in a black swirl and charged 20, maybe 30 bodies corralling that hawk right over the trees, while the falconer whistled and shook her head. I have never seen that. And for the first time, Darla's confidence slipped. The brigade disappeared, and for one evening, Harbor Oaks felt like the suburb I imagined when I signed the mortgage. Then the music started, thin and tinny and drifting from above, and we looked up to see 3 crows bobbing to the beat, while a 4th nudged a wireless speaker off the line into Darla's gutter. And a minute later her smart home chirped, now playing Dog Park playlist, and the bark track began thumping inside her living room. Another city official showed up with a thicker folder and read like he was reading a weather report. False reporting trespass, disturbing the peace. Then suspended Darla from HOA duties, pending review, and told her as gently as a bureaucrat can to stop talking. And her lawyer just stared at his shoes. 2 quiet days passed, and then a single crow landed on my mailbox, dropped a receipt with 3 words in thick marker. "We're not done." And I laughed, told it you and me both, because at that point the fight wasn't about birds. It was about being steamrolled by a clipboard. Sunset turned our street gold on the 3rd evening, and the brigade returned with reinforcements. Starlings grackles a confused pigeon, wheeling in spirals like they'd been practicing the barks falling into a rhythm. 3 beats, pause. 3 beats, pause. A weird, beautiful chorus that made everyone forget themselves for a minute. Then they formed an arrow in the sky and pointed their bodies at Darla's house, and the block groaned as one. And yes, the finale was petty. Coins on the shingles, a bottle opener on the porch, a little toy car, a ring that made a neighbor cry because she thought it was gone forever. And finally, the lead crow dropped a white plastic yard sign down the gutter so it skittered onto the walkway, and when Darla picked it up, her hand shook. The letters were thick and black. "We live here," and I didn't want to smile, but I did. That night, the HOA called a special session. No public comment, just whispers traveling porch to porch. And by 8 p.m., everyone knew Darla Kane was removed as president for harassment, misuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. And she stood on her porch and stared at the yellow notice like it might bite her, and then closed the door gently, as if the house suddenly weighed more. The piece that followed wasn't cinematic. It was small. No tickets on my door. Lily sleeping through the night. Mowers and sprinklers and chalk on sidewalks. Aries flying training circles over the soccer field, while kids clapped like he was a celebrity making a comeback. And most nights, it's quiet again. But sometimes around midnight, when the street settles and the crickets fade, I hear a single bark in the distance and smile. Maybe it's a reminder that nature has jokes, that power without humility gets tested, that a neighborhood is a contract we renegotiate every time we choose patience over punishment. Or maybe it's just a bird laughing at all of us because we gave it an audience for 2 weeks straight. You know what I mean. You tell me, was I right to fight, instead of paying to make it go away? Was Darla a villain or a neighbor who lost the plot? Should the city have stepped in harder, or did they land it just right? Where does personal responsibility end when the wild world crashes into rule books? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me who was right, who was wrong, and if a crow ever outsmarted your whole street, I want to hear what they pulled off.